Good evening, everyone. My name is Charles Royer. I'm Director of the Institute of Politics, and I'm here to welcome you to the forum for the sixth in our series of Democratic presidential candidates appearing here at the forum. And I'm here to introduce our guest, Senator Tom Harkin. As a former politician, I can never pass up an applause line. You know, I got to give it to him. Senator Harkin, on September 15th, 1991, announced his candidacy for President of the United States. Looking at that announcement and the circumstances under which Senator Harkin came to that day, it must have been quite a moment for a fourth-generation Iowan born in a town of 151 people. Not that town, no. The son of an immigrant mother and a coal miner father, a real American story. Tom Harkin's career in elective office began in 1974 when he was elected to Congress from Iowa's 5th Congressional District. He's a former Vietnam-era Navy pilot. He graduated from Iowa State University, received his law degree from Catholic University of America Law School, served as a congressional staff assistant and as an attorney with the Polk County Legal Aid Society in Des Moines. After 10 years in the House, Harkin defeated an incumbent Republican senator, Roger Jepsen, and began his first term in the United States Senate. He was, as you all know, reelected in 1990. He has served as chairman of the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Labor, Health, and Human Services and Education, and as a deputy whip in the Democratic leadership. He has also served as an active member of the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Foreign Operations. Senator Harkin, we're delighted you've come to the forum. We very much look forward to your remarks, following which we will have a period of questions and answers from this crowd that is a rather large crowd, I must say, on a night like this. I'm sure Senator Harkin is glad to see you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I didn't realize we had this many Iowans at Harvard. That's all right. Thank you. And thank you for that very nice introduction, Charlie, and also thank you all for a very warm reception on an otherwise miserable evening. You all look like very intelligent, common-sense people, except for being out on a night like this to listen to a silly politician talk, I'll tell you that. But I do appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk about what I want to cover tonight is a new vision of our national security. While I did not go to Harvard or to the Kennedy School, I want you to know that I feel like I've been instructed here. So many of my former aides, legislative, otherwise, have gone to this school. In fact, my former legislative director and former administrative assistant was not only a graduate of Harvard Law School, but a graduate of the Kennedy School. And he still remains one of my close advisors, although he's now, as they say in Washington, in the private sector, doing what graduates of this fine school usually do, and that's go through government and then get out and make a little bit more money than what they made in government. If I may begin on just a personal note, in the Senate, I sit literally a few yards from a desk once occupied by John Kennedy. It's a constant reminder of his legacy and energy and vision that he brought to the presidency and through his presidency to the world. With the Alliance for Progress, the Peace Corps, he brought hope to the poor and the oppressed. As a man who fought bravely in one war and later faced a crisis that brought us to the brink of nuclear war, he knew that our security rests not in escalating arms, but in reducing threats. I'm certain the Kennedy School, where leaders of the next generation come to question old assumptions and look to the future, would make him proud. Like John Kennedy, and unlike the leaders of the last decade who have confused idealism with materialism, I believe that most Americans, including young adults, want a president who will speak to their talents and energies and their patriotism, who will say, I want an America as great in practice as in promise, and lead them there. Tonight I'll try to provide that leadership by laying out 4 elements of a new foreign policy and defense strategy, what I am calling 4 bridges to the future. But first, let me describe the changes sweeping the globe. Let's return for a moment to the beginnings of the Cold War. President Truman based our foreign policy on 3 principles: principles embraced by every president since. First, the economic recovery of Europe and Japan. Secondly, the containment of Soviet power in coordination with allies around the world. And third, a military strategy based on large-scale, forward-deployed military force, and a nuclear arsenal capable of surviving and responding to any threat imaginable. 2 generations of Americans spent more than $12 trillion to apply these principles, and with them we won the Cold War. It was brilliant, necessary policy for its time, but times have changed dramatically and irreversibly. To pursue these policies today is at best irrelevant and expensive, and in some cases dangerous. Europe and Japan are rebuilt. We helped rebuild them. The Soviet Union is dead, and we helped kill it. The Cold War is over, and continuing the military strategy of that war is now senseless. Certainly military threats still exist, but now they're more likely to come from terrorist states, drug traffickers, and from the residue of our Cold War victory, the spread of nuclear weapons. America's strength, its position as a leader among nations, now depends less upon brute force and more on economic strength, skilled diplomacy, and our commitment to democracy abroad, to a healthy global environment, and to a substantial reduction in nuclear arms. This is the new world, if only we had a president who could see it. But we don't. George Bush is a son of the Cold War and has given no indications that he's capable of coming in from it. The United States has no major military rivals, and by all accounts it would take more than a decade for one to arise. Recall that a year ago we defeated one of the world's largest armies in just 43 days of combat, using 1/3 of our ground forces and only 15% of our total forces, reserves included. So what is George Bush's response? A defense plan that anticipates a world only marginally less threatening than at the height of the Cold War, and a military budget only slightly smaller. He's called for only 19% fewer strategic nuclear warheads in 1996 than in 1991, and for only a 13% reduction in military spending over the next 5 years. Well, I have to raise the question, how many missiles do we need? Pointed at Boris Yeltsin, who only last month argued that Russia ought to be integrated into NATO. How many troops do we need posted into Europe without a Warsaw Pact? The 1990s requires a president with the ability and long-term vision, as President Lincoln once put it, to think and act anew. A leader with the ability to forge a new set of priorities and the will to achieve them. My message today is that we must not fear the unknown, but rather embrace change and put structures in place, bridges to the future, if you will, that will lead us in the world to a new peace with human dignity, justice, and widespread economic growth. And to do so, we must commit ourselves, as we did 45 years ago, to policies based on our highest ideals, the ideals of Harry Truman and before him all the way back to the founders, the ideals that have made America the custodian of freedom's dream for all the peoples of the world. Just as Democrats were present at the creation of the post-World War II, it's going to take a Democratic president with vision and will to be present at the recreation of U.S. foreign policy for the post-Cold War period. To meet the new challenges and threats of this changed world, I propose a foreign policy based on 4 elements. First, a value-based foreign policy. Secondly, threat abatement. Third, military restructuring. And fourth, economic security. And let me address each one of these 4 bridges to the future. First, value-based foreign policy. First, our foreign policy must be rooted in traditional American values: democracy, freedom, economic opportunity, and concern for basic human rights. The same values we defended during the Cold War. If our foreign policy is going to have the backing of the American people, it had better correspond to our beliefs. Supporting human rights is not only correct, but in the long run, it's the best way to prevent instability and political violence that inevitably spills across borders and threatens peace, and therefore it's in our interest as well. I felt this way for a long time, which is why I wrote the so-called Harkin Amendment in 1975 that bans aid to governments that violates the human rights of their own people. On the other hand, George Bush has never understood that making private deals with dictators is worse than bad policy. It's an opportunistic abdication of what's right. He did it in the CIA, He did it as vice president, and he's done it as president, with people like Mobutu, Assad, and Deng Xiaoping. He closed his eyes to the brutal suppression of human rights in China. He's closed his eyes to apartheid in South Africa, as he first opposed sanctions and then lifted them prematurely. He closed his eyes and shut his mouth when 14 Lithuanians were murdered while he sat and chatted with Mikhail Gorbachev. We also need to shift our foreign policy from one heavily focused on Europe and East-West relations to one that is truly global in scope. It's time to recognize that economic growth with equity and human development and political democracy in the developing world of Asia, Africa, and Latin America benefits the U.S. as well. Latin America already constitutes one of our foremost important markets, and as that market expands, so too will American jobs and exports. The end of the Cold War also creates the opportunity to help develop the nations tap the vast additional resources necessary to build schools, health clinics, rural water systems. To that end, I will soon introduce legislation in the Senate that instructs the U.S. executive directors at the World Bank, the IMF, and all multilateral financial institutions to oppose all loans and assistance to countries that spend more on their military than on health, education, and human needs. If all third world countries simply froze their military spending, $15 billion would be released annually to invest in health and education. That's equal to our entire foreign aid budget. My bill will encourage developing countries to reduce or freeze their military expenditures, which could redirect $150 billion over the next decade to raise the standard of living of their citizens without costing the American taxpayers an additional dime. It will also encourage the reallocation of multilateral resources to the poor rather than the privileged few. And it will strengthen fragile democracies by reducing the political influence of the military. This is not just good morals. It's good policy and good economics, which is what we should have done as soon as Aristide was elected president in Haiti. Second, threat abatement. My second bridge to a new future is I call threat abatement, reducing the risk to our nation through preventive diplomacy, global arms reductions, and reducing the underlying causes of conflict and turmoil. In other words, to prevent or limit the severity of crisis and not just manage them after the fact. As President, I would act to reduce potential threats to our security, such as ethnic conflicts, nuclear proliferation, and global environmental degradation. I would take this historic opportunity to breathe new life into international institutions such as the United Nations and regional institutions such as the Conference on Security and Cooperation in Europe and the OAS. NATO has been one of the most successful military alliances in history. Sovereign nations joined together to stop an expansionistic empire dead in its tracks without ever firing a shot or giving up 1 square mile of territory. NATO, through decades of perseverance, effectively restored sovereignty to the Warsaw Pact nations. But now we must move on. We must broaden our reach to include the Eastern European and non-aligned nations, and to combine military and economic security as we seek to consummate the peaceful restoration of Europe. The vehicle, I submit, is not as important as the process, but the CSCE does exist. It has a successful track record in human rights and includes all of the relevant parties, 38 nations now. I would work to develop collective security and preventive diplomacy through organizations such as the CSCE. I propose establishing similar organizations to focus on political and economic ties in other critical regions, for example in East Asia, where a conference on security and cooperation in Asia should be a goal of American foreign policy. And we must expand the peacekeeping capabilities of the UN, restore its financial base, beginning with paying our back dues. Americans have always been generous to people in need, and we should provide humanitarian assistance to citizens of the former Soviet Union. Associations of businessmen and farmers and bankers, merchants should assist them with their painful and difficult transition to a free market economy. And we should continue the wise use of $400 million in U.S. defense funds to help them dismantle their nuclear weapons. In addition, we should insist that the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, supervise the dismantling and storage of nuclear materials. I support the current peace process that's taking place in the Mideast. But I would go even further. The United States should take the lead in organizing a temporary multilateral moratorium on the sale or transfer of arms to the Middle East. And we should place constraints on future arms sales to the region. We should also promote democracy in the region, because lasting peace will only come when all countries meet the basic needs of their citizens and allow greater freedom of expression and greater participation in their government. In short, as the Middle East Peace Conference goes on, I would want democratic reforms in nations in the Mideast to be on the table. In short, we should be using our prestige to build peace, to use international organizations like the UN, the CSCE, and the OAS to avert crisis, threat abatement as I call it, to rely on diplomatic and economic incentives to prevent armed conflict and to limit arms sales and stop nuclear proliferation. Again, there are no indications that George Bush is capable of this, or that he understands that the use of military force is more often a product of the failure of foreign policy than confirmation of its strength. George Bush's so-called foreign policy successes are actually exercises in crisis management, crisis of his own making. He was, after all, CIA director when Manuel Noriega was on the payroll. The Reagan-Bush administration looked the other way when Noriega entered the drug trade. And Republican administrations helped build up Saddam Hussein's army as we gave him intelligence and weapons technology and gave our allies the green light to sell him more. And no matter what George Bush says, we would not have had to go to war in the Gulf if we had made it clear to Saddam before he attacked Kuwait that we would not tolerate an invasion. And here again I hearken back, if I can use that word, to the Cuban Missile Crisis, when President Kennedy looked at Nikita Khrushchev in the eye and said, "You're not going to put those missiles in Cuba." And thus we prevented and averted a conflict. George Bush would have let them go in there in the first place and then go to war to get them out. Crisis management. I say we need to, again, rekindle what Kennedy showed us at that time, that we must avert those crises. Show clearly what we'd do in the event if Saddam had taken that action. So we must curtail the global arms traffic to prevent future Saddam Husseins of the world from attacking their neighbors. As President, I would ask the UN Security Council to convene a special conference to reduce arms sales. It's been proposed, of course, that we have a UN registry of arms transfers. Well, that's a good step. But we must work diligently and with urgency to reduce the flow of military hardware and not just record its progress. The world community should work together to slow weapons transactions and to change the mix of weapons from offensive to defensive systems only. Now, nuclear proliferation is the only remaining threat to our nation's very survival. The disintegration of the Soviet Union has increased the likelihood of both nuclear accidents and the spread of nuclear weapons to rogue nations. There are still some 11,000 ex-Soviet strategic weapons aimed at American cities, military bases, and industries. There may be as many as 17,000 tactical nuclear weapons scattered around the old republics, ripe for theft or outright purchase by agents of third world tyrants. And there are tens of thousands of unemployed nuclear scientists and engineers who might be tempted by lucrative offers from Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi or others. We can turn this around. We have a unique opportunity to substantially reduce the risks of nuclear accidents and proliferation. But it will take a leader who can discard the defunct Cold War nuclear assumptions, who understands that the premise of tactical nuclear weapons died with the Warsaw Pact, and who understands that the numbers and capabilities of strategic nuclear weapons on both sides far exceed those needed for deterrence. Our primary objective must be to eliminate all nuclear weapons from the non-Russian republics and to reduce nuclear weapons in Russia as far as possible. There could be no better use, I submit, for nuclear weapons in our arsenal than to eradicate a nuclear weapon on the other side through mutual dismantlement. I propose to reduce the nuclear risk by the following. First, I'll work with Russia to eliminate all tactical nuclear weapons on both sides, including air-delivered tactical weapons. Secondly, I will negotiate deep reductions in strategic weapons with a goal of no more than 1,000 warheads on each side, and seek to negotiate limits of less than 500 warheads each for the other nuclear powers. Third, I would immediately seek arrangements with all the world's other nuclear powers, including any of the other former Soviet republics that haven't destroyed their nuclear stockpiles or turned them over to Russia, work with them to agree to, first of all, a comprehensive nuclear test ban, the CDB. A ban, finally, a ban on weapons in space, a bill that I introduced about 3 years ago. A ban on the testing of anti-satellite weapons, and a global ban on the production of weapons-grade fissile material under IAEA inspection. Next to the threat of nuclear war, I believe that global environmental degradation has the greatest long-term potential for diminishing our nation's security. Borders don't mean anything to the ozone layer, to acid rain, to nuclear waste, or carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gas emissions that cause global warming. Environmental degradation is a transnational problem and should be as much part of our foreign policy as arms reductions or Middle East peace conferences. But this administration has no plan, nor has it attempted to bring together government and non-government experts in health, natural resource protection, water and sanitation, to define U.S. objectives at the upcoming June 1992 United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro this June. If I were president, I would be a leader and not the world's brake on environmental protection. And those all fall under the rubric of threat abatement. Third, military restructuring. The third bridge is a complete restructuring of our nation's military to match the fundamental shift to the threat. We need a bottom-up, threat-based military structure, not a top-down tinkering by incrementally chipping away the old Cold War military structure. We can now afford to reduce military expenditures by 50% within a decade and still protect U.S. national security better than at any time since World War II. With the end of the Cold War, we no longer need massive armed divisions stationed in Germany. In its place, we need a mix of flexible and mobile forces that can react quickly to flare-ups anywhere in the world, along with fewer heavy armored divisions. We need sea lift and airlift to get them there. We should continue research and development of force multipliers, like the high-tech smart weapons, air-based and space-based intelligence, coordination that hastened our victory and limited our casualties in the Gulf War. I have a special appreciation for reliable equipment and first-rate training. I was a Navy pilot for 8 years. So I know that too often in the past, the Pentagon has sacrificed readiness and training to keep too many kinds of weapons in production and too many soldiers in uniform. I vow to ensure that the United States military remains the best trained and best equipped in the world. I propose reshaping our conventional forces in this fashion. First, I would bring most of our troops home from Europe in the next few years and reduce our active duty force levels. We subsidize the defense of Europe to the tune of about $160 billion a year. We station almost 700,000 Americans in Europe at taxpayers' expense. 260,000 soldiers, airmen, sailors, women, plus their families, and civilian employees of the Pentagon. $160 billion a year to defend Europe against a non-existent threat. Is there any reason to squander our resources like this? In fact, I keep asking the rhetorical question. I ask people, I said, you have to tell me if this makes sense to you. This year, the German government is giving money to the Russians to pay Russian troops stationed in Germany. At the same time, we are taxing the American people to send money to Germany to defend them from the Russian troops. I submit that if that makes sense to you, please go in the booth and vote for George Bush. But it is sheer and utter nonsense, especially when the German economy is growing 3 times faster than ours. Their wage level is 144% of ours. They have national health care. parental leave, and a month's paid vacation every year for all their workers. And we're sending them about $17 billion a year directly into their economy. Nonsense. That's money that could be brought home. So I propose reducing our force levels to the 25,000 range in Europe. These troops would maintain the infrastructure for forward basing, should we ever need to do that. I would also rotate these forces in and out of Europe without their dependence to reduce costs, and I would insist that our allies share the cost of providing for their own defense. Secondly, I would rely more on the reserves and National Guard as we reduce overall military force levels. We are no longer required to plan for a surprise Soviet attack. We have no need for the same number of active divisions or fighter wings or naval battle groups that we've maintained for decades. And we can replace some of these with National Guard and reserves. They cost anywhere from 30 to 70% less than their active duty counterparts and showed their worth in combat support roles in the Gulf War. And again, I have firsthand experience with reserve forces. I spent 5 years active duty as a Navy pilot. I spent 3 years flying in the reserves. And I can tell you, I was better qualified with more flight time in the reserves than as an active duty pilot. And it cost you, the taxpayers, about 1/3 as much. And I enjoyed it more, too, I might say. Third, I would cancel, delay, or reduce production of weapons designed primarily to match anticipated advances in the Soviet arsenal. We can continue research and development of new technologies as a hedge against any Russian military resurgence or future advanced enemies, but we don't need the massive weapons production programs that drain our treasury. For example, I believe the United States should continue to develop the F-22 Advanced Tactical Fighter, but we do not need 648 of them, as originally planned, to match a future Soviet threat. We can afford to slow down the pace of development and production. We can consider alternatives, such as a base force of advanced F-18s, along with maybe 50 or 60 advanced tactical fighters. It's called the silver bullet concept that works so well in the Gulf War. Fourth, in terms of restructuring, it's important to increase investments in military capabilities that will contribute to the transition from a massive, heavily armored military to a smaller, lean but mean mobile force. We should increase expenditures for fast airlift and sea lift to assure rapid response to distant trouble spots. We need to develop better mine countermeasures, mobile anti-armor weapons, and tactical missile defenses. Again, the Bush administration has neglected development of these capabilities. Fifth, and finally, it is past time to restructure the intelligence community to meet the challenges of the new world. Obviously, we need world-class intelligence gathering, analysis capabilities, but not the massive secretive apparatus set up to monitor the Soviet Union. Estimates are, and since I sit on the relevant appropriations committees, I have to be careful, but I just say the press estimates that we read about in the press, estimate that we spend approximately $34 billion a year, about $100 million every day on agencies and weapons whose budgets are not disclosed, the so-called black budget. There is zero chance George Bush will do something about it. There's every chance that I will. So taken together, sensible reductions in conventional nuclear forces, restructuring our intelligence gathering capabilities, will reduce our military expenditures by half within a decade in constant dollars. My plan would save about $130 billion in 5 years, $420 billion over 10 years in constant 1992 dollars. George Bush and Dick Cheney claim that reducing the Pentagon's budget by more than a quarter over the next decade will dangerously weaken our defenses. Again, they're part of the problem, not the solution. Under my plan, the United States will still spend more at the end of the decade, reducing it 50%, saving $420 billion, will still spend more than twice as much as the sum of the military budgets of China, Iraq, Iran, Libya, and North Korea, our potential enemies. More than twice the sum of all of those. And we'll be better able to provide for American security. We'll be more mobile, more flexible, and more advanced technologically. We must provide federal assistance also, as we do this, to communities, small businesses, and defense workers impacted by reduced military sales and base closings. Over time, however, shifting defense dollars will create more jobs, many more, One study by Employment Research Associates suggests that on the average, 6,800 new jobs are created for every $1 billion transferred to domestic spending from the military. Shifting $150 billion, as I propose, would add more than 1 million new jobs in the long term. And think what we would get from this civilian labor. Not steel and explosives that lie in underground silos or submarines, but better schools, housing, mass transit, high-speed rail, commercial aircraft. All of this contributing to the growth of our economy. Now, the last bridge is our economic security. The last, but I believe the most important bridge to a new national security strategy. That means that we must focus on our domestic as well as foreign policy. Now, I welcome the international summit that began yesterday in Washington to coordinate aid to the Commonwealth of Independent States. But we should also address our own problems as well. As President, one of my first actions will be to convene a domestic summit of mayors and governors and business and local leaders, members of Congress, to discuss and implement a plan for rebuilding America. I don't think there's any disagreement that military and diplomatic might is predicated on military might. However, we must rebuild America from the bottom up. Reagan and Bush basically took a flyer on an experiment in spinning gold called trickle-down economics, and they spun misery and depression instead. We must devote the same energy and resources to rebuilding it as we did to fighting communism over the past half-century. It will take a great deal of new investment, primarily due to the extent that Republican administrations have disinvested in the American people and the American economy. But I believe we can and must make these investments, and that we can do it without raising taxes. If we can spend $3 trillion, as we did in the decade of the 80s, to defeat the Soviet Union, just think what we can do in the decade of the 90s to rebuild America. Here's a brief review of my economic plan. Of the $420 billion in savings, I propose devoting $280 billion of that into a special fund for rebuilding America. That will go to rebuilding America's strength in infrastructure, education, job retraining, research and development, health care. The remainder, $140 billion, will be used for deficit reduction. Earlier this week, I offered a more detailed explanation of my investment program, a blueprint for rebuilding America. I hope you get it, and I invite your comments on it. Secondly, we must pursue a new approach to trade, one that's as uncompromising in seeking open markets at the negotiating table as we've been in fighting our adversaries on the battlefield. Bush is locked in the old ways of viewing our trade policy. When he went to Japan, he took with him perhaps the 3 worst examples of American industry. Why didn't he include in his entourage executives from high-tech firms, small businesses, flat-top computer displays, or even farmers? And why were they only 23 white males? Why weren't women or minorities a part of the mission also? So we need a new approach, a new vision for our trade policy. I have announced that I have set a goal of balancing our trade deficit by the end of the first 4 years of my administration. With each $1 billion in trade deficit is equal to 23,500 jobs. Bringing that down close to zero would create some 2 million jobs, perhaps in our own country. And with its multiplier effect, the budget deficit would be decreased by an estimated $90 billion. And one last thing, I'll just deviate a little bit from my prepared text here. The other thing I will do as president will be to stop the revolving door. I think it's unconscionable that out of the 19 top negotiators under the Reagan and Bush administrations, 9, after they finished their task of negotiating for us, went to work for foreign governments. 7 went to work for Japan. Almost 50% of the top negotiators in our USTR over the years have gone to work for foreign governments. Consider this. As we sit at the table negotiating, those that negotiate for us sitting across the table from companies and from governments on the other side, as they are negotiating trying to get the best deal for America, they're floating their resume on the other side. What kind of a deal do you think they're getting for us? As president, I will hire the top negotiators I can find, but I will insist and I will make them sign something that is legally enforceable, an agreement that when they finish negotiating for the United States of America, they will not go to work for a foreign government or a foreign country, for a foreign company for at least 20 years. Let's have them negotiating for America. Tough, right? And finally, we must do much more to promote our industrial development. For example, universities, private sector, government should work together to develop new emerging technologies. Specifically, I've called for 3 new programs to promote research and development and dissemination of new technologies. The formation of an emerging technologies program, the elimination of DARPA and the creation of a new civilian research agency, and the establishment of an industrial extension service to give small and medium-sized businesses access to new discoveries. Our goal must be to achieve global leadership in such areas as fiber optics and biotechnology and composites and ceramics and supercomputers, flat panel displays. And we must do more than just create new inventions. We must work together to bring new products to the marketplace before our international competitors reap the profits from American creativity. For 50 years, it's been patriotic to have a job that strengthens our defense. Perhaps in the next 50, it will be patriotic to discover ways to strengthen our economy. I know what I have laid before you tonight is an ambitious plan, an idealistic but achievable plan, a plan for new ways of thinking and acting. To do this is my obligation as a candidate. But I believe as well that this is a plan shared by many, perhaps by most, and that it's a plan that will strengthen our security and help turn our ideals into reality. What we cannot afford and what will weaken our security is a president who has clearly blinded himself to the real threats and the real opportunities that face us in order to pursue the shadows of old fears. Instead, we need a leader who can think deeply and gather himself and herself for the struggle ahead. To do today what Democratic presidents did during the Depression of the 30s, in the face of fascism of the 40s, to give voice to the civil rights movement and the women's movement of the 1960s, to offer a vision to the people, a plan of hope for the future, and help guide them to that destiny. And I'll just close with this. On the last birthday he ever celebrated, John Kennedy quoted Emerson. He said, "The 2 political parties in our history have always been divided into the party of hope and the party of memory." Well, I think he was right. And I think it's time for hope, a time to proclaim a new promise for the future. I've traveled around this country a lot. I've listened carefully to the people, and I believe this is the message that they yearn desperately to hear. And I believe it's the message that together will help us win the nomination of our party, defeat George Bush, reclaim the White House, and reclaim this country that we love so deeply. I want to thank you all for permitting me to come and share these thoughts with you tonight on what I consider to be the blueprint for a new foreign policy for America. I thank many of you here tonight for your support in the past. And I would be remiss if I did not also ask for your help and support in the weeks and months ahead. So I ask for your help and your support. And I believe together we can win this nomination and we can win the White House and we can do exactly what I said tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Harkin. Now we have, roughly 25 minutes for questions of the Senator. We have microphones on the main floor here and 2 microphones on the next level on either side of the forum. So please queue up behind those microphones and Senator Harkin will rotate his questions around the room. Let me just urge you, because we don't have a whole lot of time for questions and answers, that when we leave this forum tonight, it is said that these questions were among the most concise and sharp and on point ever in the history of the forum.
Thank you very much. Well, I'll alternate, but I first have to start on my left. I have trouble turning right, I'll tell you that. Yes.
Senator Harkin, the USA and Great Britain have traditionally had a very special relationship. With the emergence of a united Europe and your proposal to stop subsidizing the defense of wealthier nations, how do you envisage this partnership developing in the long-term future?
I'm sorry, you'll have to repeat that. I missed something in that question. I apologize.
The USA and Great Britain have for a long time had a very special and very close relationship.
With the United States?
Yeah, Great Britain and the United States. With the emergence of a united Europe and also your proposal to stop subsidizing the defense of wealthier nations, how do you think the relationship between Great Britain and the United States is going to develop?
Well, I believe the relationship between Great Britain and the United States will continue. I mean, we share a common heritage that goes back a long way, common language, common principles, democracy. And so I don't see any real relationship changing too much there. I do see us, however, changing in terms of, as I said, shifting away from NATO as the basis of our involvement in Europe and moving more towards the CSCE as our involvement in Europe, looking upon it not just as a military alliance, but more as an alliance promoting human rights, stemming cross-border conflicts, as I said, widespread economic growth in some of the former nations of Eastern Europe. I think Great Britain will play a role in that if they get a new liberal government that helps them out a little bit, if the Labour Party does well over there this year. But no, I see our relationship with Great Britain continuing, less on a military stance and more economically joined together with the countries of Europe in a CSCE. I will say this also, that if we take the lead in a comprehensive test ban treaty, Great Britain must follow behind in that.
Thank you.
Senator, are you a co-sponsor of the Gay and Lesbian Civil Rights Bill, and if elected president, would you sign it?
Well, I speak straightly to the point. No, I'm not a co-sponsor of it. And if I'm elected president, if it comes up, and if the Congress passes it, I will sign it. Period. Yes.
Thank you, Senator. I'm short.
How about upstairs?
Senator, yes. Senator.
I'm sorry, there's another microphone someplace that I can't see?
Up here.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have a center to my left and right. Okay.
Not much of one.
This is appropriate for maybe some of the other candidates in the Democratic Party, but I'll go to the center anyway with the microphone.
During the Cold War, our litmus test for foreign assistance was anti-communism, and a large portion of our aid was military. What new criteria for American assistance would you advocate in the post-Cold War era, and what changes in level and composition of aid would you implement?
Well, as I said in my remarks, you're right. It's always been anti-communism. And I want to get away from the Bush policies that, you know, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. That's gotten us into all kinds of problems. That's what linked us with Saddam Hussein. That's what linked us with Manuel Noriega and Ferdinand Marcos and the others. We got to move our foreign policies, I said, more towards value-based. As I said, respect for human rights, democratic institutions, helping those countries that want to spend more on health and education and human development than they do on their militaries. So many of the third world countries, I think there are over 90 third world countries right now that spend a greater portion of their gross domestic product, or GNP, on the military than they do on health and education. And our foreign policy ought to be geared towards establishing relationships with those countries based on their reducing the level of their spending for military and more of their investment in health and education and human resources. I see a renewed commitment to a Peace Corps and a renewed commitment to helping developing countries promote their own indigenous food supplies, building up their own internal wealth mechanisms in those countries. I think for too long we have ignored the emerging nations of Africa in that regard. We've been more involved. Again, Here's a situation where we've been supporting Mobutu all these years because he let us base our troops and let us be involved in the Angolan strife, basing our actions out of Zaire, when we should have been more involved in trying to foster democratic reforms in Zaire. That's what I mean. We should be focusing on that and in the emerging countries. Oh, I'm
Up here?
Thank you.
Center left.
Yale.
Yale.
Sorry. You've characterized much of the Reagan-Bush economic policy as supply-side trickle-down economics, and I think rightly so.
As what?
Supply-side trickle-down economics, in
I
your words.
understand. Okay.
Would you characterize the Kennedy-Johnson tax cut, which lowered the top rate in 1964, the same way, and similarly the investment tax credit of Kennedy and Johnson?
I would not label the investment tax credit that, because I am in favor of an investment tax credit, a net targeted investment tax credit. In other words, an investment tax credit that's targeted and that's net. In other words, I'm interested in small businesses, especially, that want to upgrade their plant and equipment, get new technologies, add perhaps to their base level. I don't want to give them investment tax credit for them to do just what they're doing anyway, but a net investment tax credit. I do not see, in fact, I said just the opposite of trickle down. I see that as putting it at the bottom and building up.
The Kennedy-Johnson tax cut, the reduction of the top rate?
Well, again, I think that may not be wise. In fact, I think, if anything, we ought to turn in the other direction right now. Last year, I offered an amendment on the floor of the Senate that would have put a surtax on incomes of over $1 million a year and use that to fund some health care programs. Well, thank you. Actually, I got more votes than I got applause. I got 49 votes for that amendment, and only because the Bush administration weighed in very heavily were they able to defeat it. But I got 49 votes for it. As president, I'm going to get 51. Well, I get more than that. But,
Yes, thank you, Senator. I'm a Boston-based attorney. I'm a public defender and also worked for legal aid. I ran recently for city council as an openly lesbian candidate in Boston. And thank you. And I'm here for the senator. But I, like you, believe that all people should be included in the political process, foreign and domestic, especially women and minorities. And in this regard, you have some great ideas. But foreign policy really requires real leadership. It means really stepping out. And recently, you made a statement that you would support having all candidates included in the presidential debates. But yet, how can you really support that, or how can you do that if on the eve of Martin Luther King's birthday, you could not simply escort Dr. Lenora Fulani from the first floor to the third floor of the presidential debates? I think that that would be really stepping out to back up your statement.
well, at the debate we had in New Hampshire on health care, Ms. Fulani and Larry Agron were in the audience. They asked to join us, and then I said I was one of the ones that waved them up in front, said they ought to sit up there.
Yes, Senator.
On the last debate, I had no control over that debate, and who I suppose you can say, well, you should do this and you should do that. I say include them. I've always practiced the politics of inclusion, and I believe that. I have no problems with that. But I didn't want to give up my right to sit there and tell the people of New Hampshire and this country that I'm the only real Democrat in this race, and to point out the differences between me and the governor and the former senator from this state and the senator from Nebraska. I wasn't going to give up that right. And secondly, I want to say this also about candidates such as Ms. Fulani and Larry Agron, both fine people, got good ideas. But there is something to be said for working in the trenches, paying your dues for 17 straight years. I've been running for office. I got defeated once. I ran again, got elected. I've been taking on a Reagan-Bush administration. I have the most consistent opposition to Reagan-Bush policies of anyone running on the Democratic ticket. The most consistent. 1980, 1984, 82, 1990, all the way. Last 2 weeks ago, the Congressional Quarterly came out with a study of senators and their opposition to George Bush last year. And I'm proud I was number one in the Senate in opposition to George Bush. And in 1984, when I first ran for the Senate, I took Reagan head on in Reaganomics. And I didn't cut and run. I was one of only 2 Democrats to beat incumbent Republicans that year. I guess what I'm saying to you is I felt I paid my dues. I've been out on that front line. I've been fighting for the things you and I believe in. Well, I don't know. Maybe Miss Filani has. Maybe Larry Agron have. But I haven't seen them. I didn't see them in the 1980s out there. I was out there. And so I believe I paid my dues. People have a right to run for office. But I want to see them out there also in the trenches out there, campaigning for office and helping candidates that, by God, had the guts to stand up to Reagan and Bush all those years. Thank you.
Senator, just quick response. And I think the people really support your pro-democracy stance. However, as you know, there was a picket line of over 400 people, black and white, from all over Boston, the East Coast, and the entire state of New Hampshire, who were asking you to not cross the picket line, given your pro-labor stance. And in addition, people were not asking you to give up your seat, but were asking you then to bring Dr. Filani and Mr. Agron up to the 3rd floor so that, in fact, you could back up your pro-democracy and pro-inclusion stance.
Well, you may have a point, but I can tell you this. That in a forum like that, all these people were across the street and everything. And I got to tell you, when I ran in 1990 for re-election, and the Bush administration threw everything at me, I mean everything, and I didn't cut and run, not at all, not on any one of these issues. Where were they? Right here.
Well, in fairness, I don't know about Ms. Filani, but in fairness to Larry Agron, he was a mayor of Irvine, California, and I think doing a very good job there.
That is true.
Larry fighting on a local level.
Yeah, he did. He did do that, and he stuck up for a lot of good things.
So,
it's an age-old problem of how one becomes a viable candidate for office. And again, there are many paths to take. But I think one has to show some viable support around the country. And sometimes it takes a long time. It takes a long time to do it. And I've been at it a long time, and not running for president, but fighting these fights. I mean, 1975, first bill I introduced was a Harkin Amendment on Human Rights. I was the one that opposed the Contra War. I was the one that opposed Reaganomics. I'm the one that opposed what happened in Chile in the 1970s. I've been on the point on these issues. So I have a hard time thinking that someone that maybe all of a sudden wants to run for office, I mean, fine, they can be out there and they should be included. And if you were to ask me, should they be included, I say yes. But I don't know that I have to give up my right or my ability to be on the platform and not cross a picket line that they arbitrarily set up.
I'm not necessarily suggesting that you should. But one of the things that does appeal to me about Agron's campaign was... Sorry.
He's a good guy. He's got his head screwed on right.
Well, he builds his program around a 50% reduction in military outlays immediately. You're proposing a 50% reduction over 10 years.
That's right.
And I would be interested, that's one of the things that has drawn me to his candidacy. I would be interested in hearing your explanation for the difference in your proposal versus his proposal.
Because I think mine can be accomplished.
Well, is it enough? Is it enough?
I believe it's enough.
I
believe it's enough.
I wonder if could I ask you if you support a freeze on new settlements in the occupied West Bank?
Well, that's a tough question. I'll try to answer as best I can. I believe the peace process must continue, and I believe that the settlement issue ought to be delinked from any support that we give for settling Russian emigres into Israel. For years, we fought for Jackson Vanik to get Soviet Jews out of the Soviet Union, and now when they're out, we sort of say, okay, now you're a pawn in a power game. And I don't believe that that's what America is about. We ought to be providing them aid and support. And the issue of settlements must be tied in with the larger issues in the Mideast, and must be tied in with the peace process. It must be tied in with those other nations in the Mideast sitting down at the table, recognizing Israel's legitimate right to exist, calling off the economic boycott, providing for secure borders, reducing arms in the Mideast, and agreeing to what I called here a multilateral ban on arms transfers to the Mideast, and democratic reforms in some of those Mideast nations. Now, I don't understand. People are always sitting and say, well, Israel's got to give up land for peace and this and that. How about some democratic reforms in Syria or Jordan or Saudi Arabia? It's been my belief, and I think backed by history, that democracies don't attack each other. And if we can get democratic reforms more into some of those Mideast nations, I think perhaps we'd have a more stable situation there. I have to move on. I'm sorry. Thank you. I'm up here. Center right.
40 to 60,000 people die from malnutrition every day, and there's a famine that is expected this year in East Africa, in the Horn of Africa, that's expected to kill up to 30 million people. And a big part of that problem has to do with the IMF and the World Bank and American loan agencies charging incredibly high interest rates on loans. And many of these countries have paid back their loans many times, and still have paid back the loans and still owe many times more than that in interest. And I'm wondering if, as president, you would be willing and prepared to forgive the loans, forgive the debts that these developing countries owe to the United States. Thanks.
Well, if they're willing to stop funding their militaries so much and start putting more into human needs and into education, as I said, I had a list of all those countries here, and I'm sure some of those countries spend a lot more on military than they do on their own human needs in their own countries. That's what I'm trying to force with my amendment here. Name some countries.
Somalia.
What?
Ethiopia, Zaire.
Yeah, Ethiopia.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Somalia, Sudan.
Yes, Somalia. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Sudan. Yes, Sudan's here too. Yes, that's true. That's they're all here. They're all here. Every one of them. They have a per capita not more than $4,000 a year. They're all less than that, and they spend a lot more on military than they do on education.
It's argued, though, however, I'm sorry, I'll go on in a second. I'll stop in a second. But it's argued, however, that the reason why there's so much invested in the military is because these countries aren't able to fund social programs and need to build up their military because of the high debt that they have to pay to foreign countries. Does that work for you?
That sounds pretty circular to me.
It does.
I would, put on the restrictions that I'm about to put on my bill, no approval of any loans to those countries until they increase their spending on human needs more than the military. I would assist them in that, provide any kinds of technical assistance, food assistance, whatever it might be. But I think that we can't continue on helping countries and giving them little bits of assistance while they keep building up their militaries and spending all their wealth on militaries. We just can't continue to do that. Yeah.
Yes, Senator.
Oh, my goodness. Okay, I'm sorry.
Senator, on your point on intelligence reform, I missed the burning question, at least as far as I'm concerned. Would you actually limit the CIA to intelligence collecting and definitively end the illegal interventionary operations which have violated the sovereignty of foreign nations for at least the last 40 years?
yes, with one kind of a caveat. Who knows what threats may arise in the future, and what threats might come from whatever country. And certainly there may be a need at some future time, whether it might be drug trafficking, arms shipments, nuclear proliferation in violation of the NPT, that we might want to use our intelligence communities for activities that go beyond just intelligence gathering. So I'm not going to just draw a line in the sand and say never, never, never. I'd say yes, but you have to keep the capability, of responding to threats that might arise in other countries, threats to our interests and to our national security. I'm sorry, but you have to. Well, first of all, as I said, by investing in, here, I've got it right here, I'll give it to you, you can read it. It's called my blueprint. It even looks like a fancy blueprint on the front. A blueprint to rebuild America. By investing in our infrastructure, and infrastructure I define broadly. Oh, here. I go say, you're going a long way. I want you on my side, okay? Yes?
Senator, you've made arresting or reversing environmental degradation a cornerstone of your foreign policy proposals. You've also stressed the importance of rebuilding the American economy and strengthening world cooperation, transnational trade. You're asking people to elect you to the leadership of the most powerful capitalist nation on earth. From that position, have you given any thought to the necessity or the advisability of reevaluating the very nature of world trade and of the behavior of transnational corporations in regard to environmental degradation in light of the responsibility of transnational corporations in the environmental plight we find ourselves in?
Well, yes, and I can give you some backup material. Yeah, absolutely, because what I'm talking about being the leader in this is that we ought to be involved in looking at those multinational corporations and stuff who may be they might abide by our environmental laws in this country, but they may be, Lord knows, doing what in other countries. We really need to take the lead again in having global environmental policies. For example, the use of pesticides and herbicides. Again, I know a lot about this coming from an agricultural state. And again, you eat fruit and you eat vegetables and stuff that come from other countries that are using pesticides and herbicides that are banned in this country. And you're eating them. And they're brought into this country. We need a global ban on those, not just a ban in this country. And we need to take the lead in that. And that ought to be part of our trade policy.
Up here.
Beg your pardon?
Hi. Do you support a free trade zone from Canada to the south of Chile by the year 2000? And to expand on gentlemen down their point,
I do not.
You don't?
I do not support the bill that was pushed through by Bush last year, the so-called fast-track legislation dealing with Mexico. I do not support that. That is not to say that I do not support trade negotiations and more trade with those countries south of our border. I do. But I believe the way that the Bush administration is going about it not only lowers our standard of living and takes our jobs away, but further lowers the standard of living in those countries. I don't have it with me tonight, but I have an ad that I carry around. It was an ad that appeared in an industry magazine in September of 1990. It's a picture of a woman at a sewing machine, and it says that Rosa Martina sews on her sewing machine, and you can hire her for 57 cents an hour.
33.
That was September 1990. In August of 1991, a year later, same ad, same Rosa Martinez, said Rosa Martinez sews clothes for U.S. markets on her sewing machine. You can hire her for 33 cents an hour. Now, that's the wrong way to go. I'm telling you, I have done this. I have gone to a store, and I bought a shirt made in Latin America. I bought one made here in this country. Same shirt, same brand name. One made by, I assume, by Rosa at 57 or 50 cents an hour, however much she's making now. one made by textile workers in this country making maybe $7 an hour. The interesting thing is the price of the shirts are the same. So who the hell's making the money? It's not Rosa Martinez. And the other thing they're not telling you is that Rosa lives in a hut with a dirt floor and no running water, no education, no health care for her kids, and no hope. And so what I'm saying is, yes, I will, as president, negotiate trade agreements with Latin America, but I will do it in a way that raises their standard of living, doesn't lower ours. That way we can compete on the quality of the product and not on the misery and suffering of the people that make it.
Let's just.
I'm enjoying this.
We promised to have the senator out of here at 7:15. Let's have just two more quick questions and answers, okay?
Well, I'm enjoying this. Go ahead, yeah.
Hi, Senator Harkin. In coming months, the national health care issue will explode like a multi-warhead on the political and national mindscape. I fear, as do many Americans, that political machinations by a few, in the end, will decide for many. And this issue is too important to be left to powerful politicians and medical insurance lobbies. Each and every American should have a real vote. I ask you, Senator Harkin, would you spearhead legislation to promulgate a national referendum so every American can have a say?
On what? On national health care?
Yes, on the issue like whether we were to go with a pay-or-play system or a single-payer system, that we might put together a brochure, kind of like the census. I mean, if we can put out a census every 10 years to find out about Americans, why not find out what Americans think and get all those proposals on the table so every American is educated on the subject of health care. Let's find out how the Germans do it and the Canadians and the English. Let's find out how the Japanese do it.
Well, I don't know if that's a viable way of doing it, but here's what I've said that I would do as president. Right after I'm inaugurated next year, I'm going to clean out that Situation Room that Ollie North operated out of in the White House. And I'm going to bring into that room business and labor, healthcare industry, consumers, representatives of the elderly, representatives of our large cities and rural areas, try to make it as broadly based as possible. And I'm going to sit at that table. I'm going to be at the head of that table. I'm going to provide what's called constructive leadership. I'm not going to call them together and then go to Europe or Japan. I'm going to be at the table. And I will put a time frame on it. I've already committed myself in this campaign that and I'm the only one that's made this commitment, and I know I can do it, that I will sign into law by the fall of 1993 a national health insurance program for all Americans. By the fall of 1993. Now,
so you don't feel like each American should...
I will tell you right now, I am not smart enough to dot every I and cross every T, and neither are you or anybody else in this room, because we live in a diverse nation. We have to build a consensus bill. But I can tell you what I will lay down as the fundamentals. When I call these people together, I will say it has to be national and cover everyone. No pre-existing conditions. No pre-existing conditions. Preventative health care and keeping people healthy must be the cornerstone of a national health care program. Third, it must cover long-term care. Fourth, it should cut down on paperwork and red tape and unnecessary procedures that are being performed, have cost control mechanisms built in. It must provide for hospital or doctor of choice. I don't want someone, insurance company or anyone else, telling you who you got to see or where you got to go. It must provide for a redoubling of our efforts in biomedical research to find the causes and cure of AIDS and cancer and heart disease, and redouble our efforts in biomedical research. And last, it must provide for workplace safety and cutting down on the environmental poisons that plague us. Those are my 8 fundamentals. Exactly how we do it, we'll get together and figure that out. I can't cross every T and dot every I. But those are the fundamentals. You show me the most cost-effective way of doing it, that's what we do. I have no preconceived notions on how we do it. There are parts of the
Neither
German
do
system.
I. What I'm doing is saying that once we do come up with a series of plans, are we going to have the chance as individuals in this country to decide, will everybody in this room have a real vote?
Well, all I can say is you'll have a real vote as we do in our representative democracy. I will take this bill. I will take this bill and I'll send it to Congress by June. I'll use my political power to get it through Congress and sign into law. You will have your power through your representatives in Congress to modify it and change it, whatever, as it goes through the Congress. But I'm going to get it done in my first year, period. Put it behind us. Yes.
Yes, Senator Harkin, my question has to do with economic conversion. When you bring those 700,000 troops home from Europe, what specific plans do you have to employ them in the civilian economy? And when you cut the contracts for Raytheon and AFCO and other companies that employ large segments of the population, especially in this area, what plans do you have to re-employ those people so that sections of the country like ours, which are heavily to defense, will not suffer exorbitantly for a protracted period of time? What specific plans do you have?
First of all, that's why you can't do it precipitously in 1 year. Larry Agron notwithstanding, and as much as I admire and like Larry, you can't do it that fast. It's got to be a phased-out process. It's got to be done through attrition. We don't have a draft. These are a volunteer army. They signed up. They have contracts. However, I have proffered this one suggestion. Right now, it costs us about $55,000 to keep one troop, one soldier, airman in Europe. $55,000 a year. We might suggest that if they would like, they can come back here. We will send them to college. We'll pay their tuition, and we'll give them maybe $20,000 a year to boot and send them to college. We'd save money. They get a college education. Or train them for other work and other jobs, whether it's vocational training. If they don't want to go to a full 4-year college, they want to go to vocational training and things like that. Now, secondly, on conversion of industries, we spent $3 trillion. Oh, well, we spent $12 trillion. I mentioned that since World War II on the military. About $3 trillion in the last decade preparing for war. We've spent almost nothing preparing for peace. Almost nothing. And what I want to do is to say, that look, we have some of the best engineers, best scientists, systems analysts, computer operators, sheet metal workers, machinists working in the defense industry. Like the B-2 bomber. Now, here we're building the B-2 bomber. It's supposed to evade radar and attack the Soviet Union. Now it's showing up on radar attacking a country that no longer exists. And yet, Bush wants to build more. A lot of very good people working on that B-2 bomber. And yet, we're going to lose the world market in commercial aircraft if we aren't careful. We invented aircraft. We've always built the world's best aircraft. The present fleet of 747s and 27s and 37s and L-1011s and DC-10s are coming to an end. We have to be ready to build the next generation. Composite materials, more fuel-efficient engines, quieter, more environmentally sound, longer life periods. Who's going to build them? Airbus? Taiwanese and Japanese? Or us? So what I would say is take some of these people. I mean, we're taking your money right now. Building a B-2 bomber carries what, 2 or 3 people? Why not start investing in these industries and say, now start designing and building the next generation of commercial aircraft that we can sell here and around the world? And keep these industries going that way. Many of these defense-related industries can shift, but they need the impetus to shift. And that's where we ought to be investing. That's part of my, in that blueprint, reinvesting and rebuilding America. Yes. Oh.
Upstairs.
I go like this, but that's all right.
Mr. President,
Yes. Go ahead.
as one of the 43 million disabled Americans, I am myself am deaf, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for your leadership and the hard work that you have put towards the Americans with Disabilities Act. As you're aware of, next week, Section 2 of the law will be implemented. And I would like to ask you for your continued leadership in this effort to encourage all candidates to make their campaigns communication accessible by closed caption TV.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So
yeah,
that I
yes.
can hear as well what's good and what's bullshit.
Well, I first of all of my ads are closed captioned. Every one of my ads that I run, as I did in 1990, all of my ads are closed captions. I have insisted that every debate that I am that I'm in either have a signer on hand. I have insisted that every one of my offices be totally accessible, and I am the only candidate that has done that. Every one of my offices is totally accessible. I will not open an office unless it is totally accessible. And I do have a TDD in my offices. In my campaign offices, there's a TDD there available, and so that we can communicate. I believe in practicing what I preach, and not just saying, do as I say, but don't do as I do. I feel very strongly about the ADA. You're right, on January 25th, it goes into full force and effect. And I'll tell you, it's going to really move this country forward. I don't mean to depart too much on this, but someone once asked me how I define myself. I don't know why I thought about this just now, because the other day someone asked me, I said, how would you define yourself? And I don't know, I just thought about it for a second. I said, well, I think if anything defines me, it's the Americans with Disabilities Act. In this way, I grew up with a brother who was disabled. I saw how he was discriminated against, excluded, simply because he had a disability, deaf, as you know. And I remember when they went away to the Iowa School for the Deaf and Dumb, that's what they called it. He said, I may be deaf, but I'm not dumb. And then I saw how he was discriminated against in the workplace and in travel and everything. How his horizons were limited simply because he had a disability. And I thought if I ever got in a position to do something about it, I would. And I did. Fortunately, I got in the position when I got in the Senate. I got on the, and when the Democrats took back over the Senate in 1986, 1987, I got on Senator Kennedy's committee and became chairman of the Disability Policy Subcommittee and pushed the ADA through. Took a couple of years, but we got it through. And I guess that defines me because I see a problem, solve it, break down barriers. There's not $1 of welfare in the bill, not one nickel in a handout, but what it does is it breaks down barriers. It opens doors. It brings people in. Inclusion. Every time in America, whenever we've broken down the doors and opened the door, broken down the barriers, opened the doors, bring people in, we've become a stronger nation. Whether it's women's right to vote, civil rights, ADA, whenever we bring people in, we become a stronger country. And third, it makes people's lives better and saves us money. So anytime you can do that, we ought to be doing it by breaking down those barriers. And so if nothing, I think if you wanted to find who I am and how I operate as a politician, that bill defines me more than any other single thing I've ever done. So I thank you for bringing it. Well, one more. Well, I'll go to my right one more time. Against all my intuition. Yes.
Senator Harkin, I want to thank you.
Up top?
Up here?
Up here? Please?
Here, okay.
All right, I'll go upstairs.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. Thank you very much. How do you plan to attack the deficit, which is probably our nation's biggest expense?
Well, as I said, by reducing defense expenditures, we get about $420 billion over 10 years. I intend to use $280 of that in this Rebuild America Fund and about $140 billion for deficit reduction. But let me add this. Don't be afraid of the deficit. Be afraid of it if we don't grow. If we grow, don't be afraid of it. And again, I'll take you back in history. A little history lesson here. After World War II, our debt was 130% of our gross national product. Think about that. Our national debt was 130% of our gross national product. Today, it's about, what, 45, 47% of our gross national product. Now, Truman was facing a similar situation. Over 2 million troops coming home out of uniform just like that. Factories and plants closing because they couldn't make tanks and planes and guns any longer. Facing a terrible downturn in our economy. And what he said was, we're going to send them to school and give them a college education. We're going to build houses all over America. And we're going to build an interstate highway system. The next generation of highways in America. And put this country to work. And oh my, you read the debates. Go back, go to the library and get some of the debates at that time. Republicans wrung their hands and said, oh no, can't do it, costs too much money, got to pay the debt off. But we took it head on, and look what happened to America. And that's what I'm talking about right now in rebuilding America. Take it head on. Well, I really feel badly about keeping you. Okay, one more, and then this is
it's a quick one. First, I want to commend you on your blueprint. I think it's fantastic. I hope you get a chance to implement it.
Well, I'm glad I called on you then.
There's one figure you mentioned, though, that I've seen you mention before, maybe in one of the televised debates, the $160 billion for defense of Europe and Japan. Where does that figure come from? What's the basis for the
Defense
figure?
Department.
So you're saying that half of the
Defense Department said that, and again, they hung themselves in their own petard on this one. They said that about two-thirds, in order to bolster the support in Congress for the defense budget, they came out with this figure that about two-thirds. Is that right, Ed? Two-thirds of their budget was for NATO? Was it two-thirds? 60? 60% of the defense budget was for the defense of NATO. Was for
60% of the $300 billion, approximately $300
$290
billion.
billion.
DOD.
Yes. Yeah, 60% of that.
Okay. DOD said it themselves.
That's DOD's own figures, not mine.
Okay. Good.
They hung themselves on that one.
Right.
I bet they wish they'd never said it now.
That's right. Well, thank you.
Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Thank you.